It is now time for question period. The member from Nepean Park.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Obviously, I rise today and on behalf of all colleagues, say our profound condolences to the political community with the passing of Mr. Hillier and yesterday of Mr. Ford. My question is for the Premier. On October 28th, the Premier said, and I quote, "The agreements were in line with our net zero bargaining framework," when she was referring to the secret union payouts with the teachers. On November 25th, the Premier said 3 more times that agreements were made with a net zero framework. 4 stretch goals in a very small amount of time. Now today we find out from the CP's Alison Jones that the deals, quote, actually come with an additional $300 million cost. No. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we know the Auditor General has yet to return her report into her investigation of these secret payouts. So I ask the Premier, how does net zero equal $300 million?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I know that the Minister of Education is going to want to comment on this. And what we're talking about is 9 agreements, Mr. Speaker, that have been ratified, that are consistent with our net zero bargaining framework, Mr. Speaker. Most importantly, students remain in school. There were no cuts to the classroom, Mr. Speaker. There were modest wage increases that were offset by finding other savings throughout the collective agreement. But let me just say, Mr. Speaker, on the benefits. We're taking more than 1,000 different benefit plans for teachers and education workers, moving them to a handful of provincial trusts. And I think that it would be interesting to the member opposite to know that for years, from the time I was a school trustee, from the time that the Minister of Education was a school trustee, there has been a conversation in the education sector about how to rationalize the benefits packages across the province, Mr. Speaker. That will save money, Mr. Speaker, and that's why making that move was so important.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Speaker, this is at least $300 million taken out of the education budget. That is not a rounding error. I know the Premier is not an accountant, but that's $300 million more dollars than she told this House. This is also, of course, the same Premier that told us the cancelled gas plants were only $40 billion before we found out the true cost was $1.2 billion. She is cutting demonstration schools across this province, special ed cuts everywhere. Parents are fundraising for basic necessities in our classroom. I ask the Premier, what does $300 million in education funding mean to her? Because it certainly doesn't mean pizzas and popcorn to me.
You say it, please. You say it, please. Thank you.
Again, Mr. Speaker, let me just...
Sorry, I didn't recognize you, Premier. Carry on, please.
Let me just say, Mr. Speaker. Let me just say, Mr. Speaker, that the changes in the benefits, Mr. Speaker, are changes that have been talked about in the sector for many years. Because when the school boards were amalgamated, Mr. Speaker, when the funding model changed in this province at the hands of the previous government, Mr. Speaker, it only made sense to talk about how there could be savings in those benefits plans. Yeah. Finally, we've gotten to the point where we can do that, Mr. Speaker, where those benefit plans can be amalgamated. There can be changes that will save money to the system. It will actually lower the cost of benefit plans through the power of bulk negotiation. It only makes sense. And, Mr. Speaker, I actually would have thought this is the kind of efficiency and savings that party would support.
Final supplementary.
Speaker, the Premier of Ontario just had the audacity to look at this Assembly and say that she found $300 million in efficiencies when it cost more than a net zero, cost $300 million. You can't trust this government anymore when they tell us it's going to cost one thing.
Stop it. The chippiness is pretty high, and I can read it, so I'm going to start looking at individuals. Carry on, please.
The power worker deals had a net zero deal until we found out that it was $87 million more to buy Hydro One shares. The teachers' union deal was supposed to be net zero until we found out it's at least $300 million more. You have one job, and that is to find net zeros in this government in order to balance the deficit, which you have no objective of doing. So I would like to understand from the Premier of Ontario, you've assigned somebody in the Treasury Board to find net zero deals.
Question.
You failed at every turn. What is the Deputy Premier's job, anyway, if she can't find deals here? Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Yes, thank you very much, Speaker, and I'm delighted to answer this question. There were 1,000 different benefit plans. Some of those benefit plans might have had 15 or 20 people in them. They were extraordinarily expensive. We have been talking since this problem in education, since I was the president of the public school boards, but we had no legal authority to do anything about it, to bring everybody together. For the first time in this round of bargaining, because we had the authority to negotiate centrally, we actually have the ability to bring 1,000 inefficient benefit plans into 5 or 6 pools. But when you set things up like that, there's an upfront investment.
Thank you. Seated. It's not helpful.